different and in better ways. The second is that you are a hopeful people. We don't just think we can make the world a better place. Many of us know it deep in our hearts. Isn't it great to feel that way about UUism? Yeah. Do you wake up in the morning thinking, dang, I'm so glad I'm a UU. And I'm going to go out today and I'm going to challenge the entire Western religious tradition, or start up the Red Cross, or tear down oppressive racial systems, just like Frances David or Clara Barton or Frances Ellen Watkins Harper? Yeah, that gets you going. Are you someone who's willing to go on a very long sea voyage and publish ideas that challenge God's role in the creation of the world? Are you willing to partner with someone who has a very different religious belief than yours and honor and hold that person for a lifetime? Like our Unitarian ancestors, Emma and Charles Darwin, I believe UUs have the power to shape the world in important ways. One of those ways is by modeling how people with profound differences can live and love together. Their courage, hope, and ideological openness to each other are the things that I admire about the Darwins. Charles had returned from his long scientific voyage on the Beagle when he married Emma in 1839. His voyage and observations had radically changed his view of God, humanity, and nature. His religious views were transformed from those of a Unitarian Christian into a Unitarian doubter and agnostic. Someone who was no longer sure about the nature of God. We can only imagine and read about or maybe watch PBS, from our modern perspective, what it's like to live in the British class system, what it would have been like in the 1800s, with the wealthy supported by many servants and all believing it was God's will to have people in their proper place. It took Charles Darwin 20 years to publish his masterwork on the origin of species. Some argue Charles intentionally delayed publishing the book that would challenge the prevailing Christian belief that God created a static world in 6 days with 1 day of rest, and with God and white men, wealthy white men, at the top of the order. Yes, by questioning this divine order, Darwin would have been challenging his own place in this very comfortable, colonial, racist, elitist, sexist world. But other argues he did not publish The Origin on the Species because he was just a meticulous researcher and it was, unfolding the way it was supposed to. His ongoing research for On the Origin of Species did give Charles a problem. When he decided to marry Emma Wedgwood, he didn't know if he should tell his devout Unitarian Christian wife-to-be about his doubts about God. Today, this might not seem like a big problem, but Charles was afraid she would not marry him if he told her, and she was very concerned about their upcoming wedding when he did tell her. Charles' father did not want Charles to tell Emma about his religious doubts. But to Charles' credit, he was honest, and to Emma's credit, she was honest too. They were nervous about their different beliefs, but were able to move forward. When Charles and Darwin and Emma Wedgwood did marry in 1839, they personified white, affluent, upper middle class English privilege. Charles was the fifth child of a wealthy doctor. From his writings, Charles appears to be someone most of us would want as a friend. He's cordial, he's funny, he's intelligent, and he puts forth his views without being dogmatic. He's kind of open. So he just sounded like a neat guy. When his mother died, when he was 8, he was raised by his Unitarian father. The Darwins moved in the intellectual circles of the day, and Charles was exposed to scientific thinkers and modern ideas from a young age. Charles can serve as a role model for those of us who are late bloomers. As a young man, Charles did not look like a promising breadwinner. A passion for nature was not an approved occupation by family and proper English society at that time. A young man would need to support a family. Charles did not apply himself to his studies, as Karen mentioned, in the way that his father wanted him to. He was pulled out of high school at 16 to attend medical school with his brother. He was sort of tagging along. He wasn't really into it. But its doctor father assumed that this would be a good profession for both boys. Things did not work out. After observing operations as a teenager, Charles was so traumatized, he not only refused to go into medicine, he got deathly faint at the sight of blood for the rest of his life. So it had sort of the opposite effect. When he got his chance to go along on a surveying trip to South America on the Beagle, the journey that launched his serious scientific career, his father did not want him to go. He thought it would be an indulgence and a waste of time and money. The dad's money, right? No. One uncle spoke up for Charles, and so at age 22, he went off on his famous voyage. When he returned, but his father still had no way of knowing, what was going to happen with this kid. How are we going to, get him into the what would then have been the real world of making money and being able to support a family. Charles was expected to go back to college immediately, and there was still some pressure on him to become a minister. If you had extra sons, the ministry in England was a preferred vocational path for a gentleman. It helped that Dr. Darwin had a lot of money. He had financed Charles' education and trip, and later bought Charles and Emma a house in the country on 18 acres of land. It was expected that as an Anglican church vicar, he could have naturalism as a hobby. And many Victorians did that. That was like a big hobby, right, during that time, to go out into nature and study and have your butterfly collection and all that good stuff. There was one problem with Papa Darwin's plan for this restless son. As I mentioned, Charles was having a lot of doubts about God. These doubts, they didn't decrease over time. He kept, mulling things over. So if you doubt the existence of God, becoming a vicar for the Church of England probably wouldn't be the best choice for your long-term employment options. When he returned from the Beagle, Charles was getting toward the age of 30, and he had had some romantic troubles. The woman he'd been seeing as a young man had married someone else while he was gone for 5 years. No surprise there. He was considered a very good catch in his social circle, and he was expected to marry within his own class. So after much soul-searching about marriage, and he created I don't know if you've heard of the pro and con list that he wrote. It's a long list of pros for getting married and a long list of cons. And sort of one of the infamous things was, at one point he said, well, having a wife is better than having a dog. And he really liked dogs. So it was, But he started sort of noticing one of his first cousins, Emma Wedgwood. Emma, again a cousin, and the granddaughter of the famous fine pottery craftsman Josiah Wedgwood. She lived in a beautiful home. The family mingled also with the British upper class and the intelligentsia, and the progressives, the progressive Unitarians. Emma was an independent woman. She loved her life with her family, and it didn't seem like there was any pressure for her to get married because she was getting up towards 30 also, which in that day and time was a kind of a problem for marriageable young folks. Emma wrote Charles a letter in those early days in response to his fessing up to his agnostic religious beliefs. She believed in Christ as our Redeemer, and that belief in him was needed to get into heaven. She was worried Charles would go to hell when they died, and she wouldn't be able to see him for all of eternity. And that's a long time. Her beloved sister had died a few years before, and she passionately believed they would be reunited. She set Charles to reading his Bible. She gave him little assignments of, what to read, hoping he would have a change of heart and accept Christ's role in salvation. He never did. Emma was not a rigid religious person. She was a socially liberal Unitarian, but she held the belief that Jesus is our Savior, and believers would go to heaven. And she worried about the state of Charles' soul for their entire lives. How did this 19th century power couple manage not only to live together, but thrive together with such different theological views? Well, this was a time when if you were a religious free thinker, you could be shunned by your entire community. What did it mean for Charles Darwin to be an agnostic? Paradoxically, he was highly engaged in the religious life of their village. He knew the Anglican vicar. He was hands-on with the daily religious life of the community. And even he had stopped going to church, but Emma and the kids still went. So they were still very involved in that aspect of their community life. Many couples today face the same type of differences in religious faith and belief. We as Unitarian Universalists have chosen to live with our own theological differences in community. Many UUs now identify as Charles did, as agnostics or atheists. Their modeling of respect, love, and support for each other can speak to us through time. Their joint story is remembered today because of Charles' prominent role in the scientific community and Emma's involvement and intelligent partnering. Their extensive letters to each other documented their lives. At first, I didn't understand how they could have written so many letters. They're in the next room. The person's in the next room. They were apart a little bit, but mostly they were together all the time. But when I thought about, well, what if, emails, sending your partner an email, or if you think of it in that spirit, that's kind of how it was. It was a part of the communication of their life. Their prolific letters, and this was not unusual, just letter writing in general, for that time, allows us to look at the Darwins. I mean, there are so many books and articles and everything written on the Darwins because we have these letters and his scientific work. And it allows us to see the Darwins from many different angles. What is the lesson we can learn from these two people? Biographer Deborah Heiligman calls their marriage a leap of faith. Their religious differences did not keep their lives from a deep intertwining. They learned to live together, to trust each other, and they grew together as individuals and as a couple during their years together. Author Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Committed, A Skeptic Makes Peace with Marriage, tells us that to be fully seen by somebody, then, and be loved anyhow. This is a human offering that can border on miraculous. Emma and Charles had that kind of relationship. Emma served as Charles' assistant, his editor, his confidant, as he wrote his masterwork on Origin of Species. He released many other scientific books and pamphlets before publishing Origin. He had a huge amount of patience for observing differences and generational changes in fossils and living things. His evolutionary theory was based on the observation that minute changes in plants and animals would give creatures a slight advantage over others for existence. And borrowing the idea that there will not be enough food for everyone who is born, he concluded that all nature is competing for limited resources. Over time, the minute changes will favor those who can adapt most quickly to environmental change. And this is a vast oversimplification of his theory. I encourage you. He's very readable, to go and do some reading on that. Charles was someone who could observe and study barnacles for hundreds of hours. That takes a special kind of person. Emma did not share the passion he had for science. She was a gifted musician, and Charles would sit and listen to her for hours, and she read to him every night for all of their lives. They would be together. Yes, in a different time, Emma would have been able to be more of her own person. But she did choose a partner who valued her talents and gifts, which allowed her a much wider sphere than many women of the time who were trapped in the hierarchy and patriarchy of the day. This is an explanation, of course, not an excuse for those times, but they were different. There are many published biographies and studies about the Darwins. They were incredibly passionate about their 10 children. She was relaxed, and this is what endeared her to me, a noticeably disorganized mother. So I can relate to that. This couple left not only a scientific legacy that Heiligman tells us, but a legacy of talented children. They were not your typical Victorian parents kids being seen and not heard. They were involved with their family, and they let their kids just run all over the house. Charles included them in his studies. I watched one of the movies about Charles and Emma's relationship called Creation. Has anybody seen that movie? Oh, gosh. It got panned, but there were some kind of neat parts. And it was fun to see a visual interpretation of the family. watching Charles kind of troop around with all the kids behind him and having them he would have them do things like scream, and then he'd write, like make notes on, like scream and stand on one foot. He would do these little experiments with them. So it would be a little harsh to say he experimented on his kids, but they were another type of animal observation for his very busy mind. And Charles suffered a mysterious ill health after he got back from his voyage. Emma was a good kind of helper for that, to help him along and kind of take care of him. And even strong marriages can face tough times. Their marriage hit a serious rough patch when their eldest child, Charles, and Charles's favorite, Annie, died. Both parents were devastated, but they realized they needed to lean on each other or their love would erode. This family tragedy brought them closer together. And after Annie's death, Emma wrote to her husband to say that he was her prime treasure and asked him to take care of his own health and himself. Author Jamie Criss tells us that to say that one waits a lifetime for their soulmate to come around is a paradox. People eventually get sick of waiting and take a chance on someone. And by the art of commitment become soulmates, which takes a lifetime to perfect. By the art of commitment. What a wonderful phrase that is. I believe that Emma and Charles, who were close, again, in their 30s, almost 30, chose a working collaboration and a partnership marriage. It made each of them better. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we have the opportunity to be better together than apart, in spite of our individual beliefs around God or goddess or spirit or soul. To practice the art of commitment with each other. With the end of becoming a more loving and stronger community. Our strength as a group should be powerful enough to offer each person who walks through our doors an opportunity to be held in our history, to participate in our worship services, our committees, our annual meetings, all those things that we share together. And lastly, like the Darwins, we can draw from the shared strengths to go out in the world with hope and make changes in thoughtful, healthy ways. One theory that has challenged the competitive aspects of Darwin's understanding of evolution has been put forward by psychologist Michael Tomasella. Tomasella works in the field of evolutionary anthropology. After decades of study, he finds that cooperation, not competition, is what gives humans the edge in the animal kingdom. It seems very possible that natural selection of the most adaptable creatures could favor cooperation and love, however you define it, for living and loving in the long haul. If love and cooperation do lead the way, our Unitarian ancestors, Emma and Charles Darwin, modeled a marriage that is an example of the art of commitment. Our deepest relationships take effort, and while competition can be stimulating, cooperation is what fuels our healthier and more loving relationships. Yes, our UU and other relationships can take a lifetime to perfect, but that dedication and commitment can open the way for us to become what Emma called Charles, prime treasures to each other. I invite you into that beautiful, entangled journey of mind, heart, spirit, and hope. Blessed be.